मित्रों, समय की मांग है कि हम तय करें कि हम पूरे विश्व को बाजार बनाएंगे और हम मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में लीड करके दुनिया के बाजार में हमारा माल डंप करेंगे।
While absorbing the latest technologies from around the world, Indian manufacturing must also be built on Indian patents. Old labor laws have forced businesses to use contract labor. As you know, they are often underpaid.
Everyone's saying, oh, we need to change the labor laws. But where's the agreement about what the changes should be? It's partly to do with the laws, but it's a lot to do with the practices of management in these enterprises.
Land acquisition policy has now been notified and has come on place. I really think that currently the way it is structured and all the processes and committees that are part of it will make it very difficult to acquire land for large projects.
अगर हमें ग्लोबली अपना रेपुटेशन खड़ा करना है तो जीरो डिफेक्ट ये हमारी पहली शर्त होती है और दूसरी शर्त होती है पैकेजिंग।
We need manufacturing growth to create 100 million jobs, and starting now, because the young people who need the jobs are already here.
Let's target growing the manufacturing sector to 25% of GDP, generating 100 million new jobs in the next decade. On our part, we will ensure a fair, rules-based and stable environment for entrepreneurs, large and small. An environment where businesses need not compete in the corridors of Harizina Hill, but compete instead on the streets and gullies of our towns and villages.
ब्रांडिंग जरूरी होता है। दुनिया के सामने मेड इन इंडिया का बिल्कुल हमारा ढोल न पीटता है।
Hello and welcome to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today in the 6th show of our series, we have 10 policy initiatives that will enable the next Prime Minister to boost manufacturing. No country in the world has developed without a strong manufacturing base. And with a little help, India could become the world's factory while generating millions of jobs. Our suggestions have been culled from recommendations made by a group of experts, and you can get all the details from our website thinkindia.in.com. Joining us in the studio are three of these distinguished contributors. We have R.C. Bhargav, chairman of Maruti Suzuki, and someone who knows all about the opportunities and perils in Indian manufacturing. Rajiv Kumar, eminent economist and former general secretary of Industry Chamber FICCI. Rajesh Chakravarti, executive director of Bharati School of Public Policy at the Indian School of Business. And with them is our very own Dheeraj Nair, CEO of Network 18's Think India Foundation, who has anchored this project. We also have an audience in the studio, among whom are some people who have actively pitched into the debate on Twitter and on our website. I would urge all of you to contribute to future editions on Twitter and our website, and we would be delighted to invite you to participate in the upcoming shows. Do note that we will present our suggestions on manufacturing and 13 other policy areas to the next Prime Minister, who takes office in June. Right, so we come to the first 3 points that we have for the Prime Minister. The first one is more is a statement of intent. We are saying declare manufacturing to be priority number one. Governments usually hesitate to do that. They usually talk about social sectors as priority number one. But we are saying the time has come to declare manufacturing as the priority number one, with a manufacturing board which is directly headed by the Prime Minister, which meets every week to clear projects. Point number 2 is related to that, which says that you've got to have a target time limit for clearances. And we've benchmarked it at 125% of the time taken in Singapore and China. So these are points 1 and 2. Mr. Bhargav.
Declaring manufacturing as priority number one, of course, is very easy to do, actually. The question is, what does priority number one mean?
Right.
And how do we implement it?
Right.
We created a manufacturing policy 2 years ago.
Right.
But it has not meant anything has become any more urgent in terms of implementation than it ever was.
Right.
So in India, we do a lot of things on paper.
Right.
And I suspect this declaration might be very much like putting something on paper, which never gets translated into real actions.
What we are suggesting, sir, is what happened in the early 90s when India was a closed economy. And to get foreign investors into the country, we set up the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, which used to meet every week.
Yeah, but what did it do?
It did get foreigners interested
Nothing
in
like
investing
what
into
should
the
have
Indian
come.
economy.
Nothing very much.
Well, from a base of zero, it
Because
did more.
all the factors which hinder the coming of foreign investment into India, most of them remain untouched. Our restrictions on FDI, our restrictions on people with technology investing in India, whether it's in mining, whether it's in defense, whether it's in electronics, none of those have changed.
So are you saying that even if the push comes from the Prime Minister, this is something that we are going
That's
to be
the
very
next
sluggish
point,
about?
that manufacturing and most of manufacturing actions which are taken and which retard the growth of manufacturing are no longer with the central government.
Right.
They are with the state government.
Right. So, Rajiv, let me get you in here. We've also suggested that to enlarge the compass of this board, you must have the Chief Minister, the relevant Chief Minister also sitting in with the Prime Minister so that at least both are focused on getting the solution to the same problem.
Raghav, I would instead give a very specific target, and which would be that India will become 50th in the ranking of doing business surveys of the World Bank from the current 134 that it is. Now, that's a very specific thing to go for. You don't need any board. You do what you like for it.
Okay.
But the Prime Minister, along with the conclave of Chief Ministers, should say that India will become 50th, at least it will climb so many places in the doing business survey. That's the first one. And the second one that I would do is to say that currently the 70 clearances that are required for manufacturing or by the manufacturers would be whittled down to no more than 7.
So that could possibly be the first task of the National Manufacturing Board or whatever you want to call it, that clean up these number of 70 and whittle it down to 7.
They're all state acts. You can't clean it up from the center.
But you have said about 30.
The Boiler Act, for example, the clearance, the boiler inspectors, they're all state subjects.
But
Fair enough.
It's a third and a two-third.
It's a third and a two-third
Because,
is what Rajiv seems to be
and
suggesting.
Just one other
Yes.
thing is that a large number of this could be shifted to self-regulation under strict penalties. So that you get your boiler inspected.
Yes.
If you don't find it good, we'll come and so that's the way to go in my view.
So Rajesh, you've heard the debate. We suggested a point which is really more a sort of mandate to action. Manufacturing board is really a method to a mandate to action. Doable?
No, I think my first reaction would obviously be in line with, well, yeah, you can declare it a national priority. What does that accomplish? But one thing that we have witnessed in looking at how government functions in India, particularly bureaucracies, our standard day-to-day job of a bureaucrat takes, anything that goes in that takes forever to accomplish. As soon as you put something on a mission mode, whether it is polio eradication or whether the same bureaucracy, the same bureaucrat, the same system, somehow gets
Right.
up to speed.
Right.
And it actually delivers certain
Right.
things which the normal activity never gets done.
Right.
So to that extent, and with the very valid point that, well, you create a mission at the center when all the problems lie at the state, what does a mission at the center accomplish?
Right.
Absolutely a very valid point.
Right.
But if we can create a council which actually involves the state heads together with the
That is what
PM
we have
and
suggested,
flags
that we-
the thing,
Right.
it's quite possible that...
So let me take a quick audience poll on this. How many of you feel that if the Prime Minister himself was to focus on it and co-opt the Chief Ministers, some of this, the wheels can start moving faster? How many of you feel that could happen? Okay, so our audience does have a lot more faith on the Prime Minister getting things done. Dheeraj.
Touched by the faith of the audience.
Yes, Dheeraj.
Well, Raghav, I think there is certainly a case to be made of center-state cooperation on this. And in the central sphere, I think one of the big hurdles which have emerged in the last 5 years is environmental clearances,
Right.
which have really slowed down things across manufacturing, mining, and so on. So I think there is a role that the center has to play. And I think the Prime Minister, being the Prime Minister of the country, he'll have chief ministers from his own party, from his own coalition. He can use that position to persuade, to coerce in certain cases and get things done. I mean, obviously there's a plethora of laws which is at different levels, but a rationalization, perhaps a manufacturing board can be the fora where these are discussed
Right.
and thrashed out.
Right. So I will go with Rajesh's thing of if once India takes it up in a mission mode, sometimes things do happen. I'll
May I make a comment?
yes.
I think the real problem in India is the mindset of people.
Right.
That whether it's at the political level or whether it's at the public level, including the audience here, I can see, that whether manufacturing is considered an activity which needs to be encouraged or not.
That's right. So which is
Because
why
people don't have the mindset for manufacturing.
Yeah,
They don't want manufacturing. And you can't get manufacturing done by putting the Prime Minister in charge of a board. That's all the wrong way of doing it.
No, Mr. Bhargav, I think we are giving too much importance to the Prime Minister and the board. How do you change mindsets? You change mindsets by.
I'll tell you how the mindset.
So we'll move on to that. I'm afraid we have to stick to a bit of this agenda that we have. So we'll move on to the other points. We have a point number 3 here. And this is also sometimes seen as politically contentious. We are saying that all the tax concessions and other concessions that are given to the small scale sector, which actually forces them to stay small or incentivizes them to stay small, remove those. Instead, give them cheaper finance, allow them, incentivize them to become bigger. Would you like to get in
here? It's not the incentives which keep them down. It's what happens to them when they grow bigger in terms of all the regulatory requirements and the visits of different types of inspectors, which keeps them down.
Right.
So it's not the withdrawing of incentives which is required. It's letting them function, and that's what we have been discussing, that if you clean up the process of running industries and don't have these 70-odd guys coming.
Fair enough. So it's the same point you're saying that we...
Not the same point.
Thing to do maybe is that apart from 4 or 5 inspectors, you announce that everybody employing less than 200 people will not have a visit by the inspector forever in this country.
Right.
You do that, and I think you will see a huge rush. And just one other point is, because the point number 2 about a target that you got is very good. And I've been saying that to change the mindset, India should not be ashamed to say that rather than sell Incredible India, we will now sell Credible India.
No, fair enough.
That's
I
the
think
way
you're
to
making the same point in that unless we change the mindset and give it the priority that this sector deserves, things won't start moving. Rajesh.
Well, I'll differ a little bit with the previous speakers, because the issue about inspectors and others are well taken. But if you really look at data, you find that the size of SMEs, they really crowd around those cutoff points where the tax concessions are different, give different treatment to small and larger businesses.
So they are incentivized, you're saying, to stay small.
There is some proof that those concessions do have an impact, and that's notwithstanding all the other issues that are obviously there. And what is interesting about Indian industry and manufacturing in particular is that when you look at the promoters of SMEs, you find that it's not a small sapling which grows into a large tree in India, but we generate bushes. Right? So same family will have 20 SMEs, all blocked just around that cutoff level.
Yeah. So I think you're saying there is empirical evidence for that. Leader, sum it up for us and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think there was a old saying that small is beautiful, but I think that is changing in the world. Scale makes sense in terms of costs, in terms of competitiveness. So I think any incentive which forces companies to stay small must go.
Okay, so we have our first 3 points for the next Prime Minister. Get the mindset changed, get manufacturing on the most important agenda that you would have. Stay with us. You go to our website, thinkindia.in.com, give your suggestions, and come back right after this break. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. And today we are looking at how the next Prime Minister could boost manufacturing. We've done about 3 points for him already. We've got points number 4 and 5 now coming up for him. Point number 4 is something that you would have heard a lot of debate around, which is really you've got to have flexible labor laws. It's politically going to be a very difficult task to achieve. What we've suggested is that the centre should stop setting labor laws, and this should entirely move to each state government, so that they're competitive about how they want to get the employment level going in their respective states. And a related point we made is that employment exchanges should now be outsourced to the private sector, so that they can do a much better job of matching labor requirement with labor supply. Mr. Bhargav.
The problem with the labor laws is only one, which is it provides for no appointment of labor on a temporary basis. When you talk of flexibility, there is nothing in the labor laws which allows you to have temporary workers. So when there is a swing in production, there's seasonal variations, there's otherwise, because of economic factors, variations, you can't adjust labor laws. That's why people bring in contract labor.
That's right.
And that contract labor then is misused because you can pay them less, you can keep them under better control. So it's a bad system. We just should have a provision for temporary labor like most countries have.
And which is why we've suggested that give it to the states. If a state chief minister, Rajiv,
Not necessarily. Anybody can put in a provision for temporary labor in the Act.
But in terms of trying to make it easier to
you
achieve
have to make sure that temporary labor means that the last come will be first go. That people who will be made regular from those people who come in, they'll be recruited in the same way as regular labor. And when these people are laid off for periods when there's low work, they should get some part of the wages as a kind of subsistence wage.
Right.
You do that, it will be acceptable to
Following
everybody.
on what Mr. Bhargav said, first thing is that you have to clarify, flexibility does not mean hire and fire.
Exactly.
Right.
Firms do not want to hire and fire, they want to retain labor.
Absolutely.
Because they train, they invest in them. So, but there has to be a provision for transitory unemployment. And I think the National Manufacturing Policy makes a very good suggestion to set up a social security fund to be funded by the government and the employers, so that when you put labor out for a time period, he or she can be retrained by using that fund and also gets something to tide over.
Right.
So you see, unless you show very clearly that you are going to safeguard the interest of the labor force, you will not get labor flexibility.
Right.
So the system has to be, and here the most important thing, Raghav, is that you have to bring the informal sector, where the working conditions are inhuman,
right,
above the surface, and make them a part of a minimum set of labor laws, which
right,
will be implemented everywhere in the country, because otherwise this differentiation will continue,
right,
and you will not be able to get a uniform manufacturing sector, which is what you need to get a globally competitive sector in
right.
India.
Rajesh?
Well, the labor laws are critical, and and the states do have a huge role in these labor laws. I mean, there is a significant variation across states on the friendliness or business friendliness or labor friendliness of states, and that have been found to generate effects which have often been unanticipated when those reforms were
Is an
brought
example?
in.
Can you give us an example?
Well, the famous is obviously the state of West Bengal, let's say. Right? This has been a celebrated study by Besley and Burgess going back in the 1990s, which has studied the cross-state variation of labor laws in India,
right,
and the impact that it has generated in industrial employment and unemployment and migration and all of those factors. Now, that study itself is now being questioned in other work, but there's a whole body of work that looks into it. And it does show that more quote-unquote labor-friendly states do end up with migration out of those states, with severe level of unemployment, exit of firms away from those states. So labor laws,
right,
restrictive labor laws are very important.
And this subsidiary point or a collateral point that we have of outsourcing employment exchanges to private management, so that they do a better job of matching demand and supply.
I think more and more in the digital age, the traditional employment exchanges are losing their relevance. So people are
make it online is what we are saying.
Yeah, so it is automatically becoming online. I mean, you may have it, you may not have it. The job search process has already moved away from it.
Dheeraj?
Yeah, I think we discussed labor laws in our show on investment as well, and there's certainly a need for flexibility. I think Dr. Kumar made an important point, that the fact that in 20 years of liberalization, we don't have an increase in the percentage of formal people employed in the formal workforce. So it's about 7 to 8 to 10%.
Right.
It's not really gone above that, despite all the growth and despite all the fact that Indian industry, whether it's automobiles or anywhere else, prefers to use capital instead of labor in a labor surplus country. It's really a warped situation which needs to be corrected. And I think some of the opposition is imagined more than real. They are practical ways which have been suggested by the panel, which can easily be done. And I don't think there'll be so much resistance because the majority, it will benefit the majority. And in a democracy, the majority should matter, right?
So let me get a sense of the House here. Would you be for flexible labor laws where there is a period of transitory unemployment, but there are safeguards in place to help you tide over those transitory unemployment phases? Would you be in favor of that? Okay, so our audience is certainly ahead of our leaders. they certainly seem to be far more in favor of reforms. I want to come to a far more contentious issue, or equally contentious issue, and that's about the new Land Acquisition Act. A lot of people feel that it has made things far more difficult. Now, there are two parts to the Land Acquisition Act. One is the price formula. Our suggestion is that since the price formula has come in, it's going to be very difficult politically to change it. However, there are a large number of subsidiary issues which really increase the complexity of the law. They lead to much more rent seeking, many more government approvals, many more clearances to be taken. That can clearly be cleaned up. Let me start with you, Rajesh, on that.
Well, the Land Acquisition Act, the new Land Acquisition Act certainly makes things difficult to set up.
But now it's law. And in India, it's very difficult to roll back these laws.
Yes.
Especially if they've come in only 6 months ago.
Right. And but we have to understand that also when we talk about industry, manufacturing in particular, in a big way, our mental focus is always about very large scale manufacturing. And that is obviously very important, particularly in a global setup where you need quality, you need... But about 85% of our manufacturing activity in the country, or 85% of manufacturing employment in the country,
is in the smaller scale sector.
Is in the smaller scale sector. Yes. So now, even the small scale requires land. It's not, land is a critical element for all of that.
So how do we move forward and get practicality into the new law?
It is difficult. It's a difficult one.
We've suggested just take away. Yes, Rajiv.
Right.
I think one very practical way out is that all the state governments in this country are sitting on huge land banks already,
yes,
which have been acquired, and they are under, industrial zones, industrial states, etc., etc. Make them into the new manufacturing hubs and
right,
bring the small scale and give it to them.
And therefore, don't get into this problem of acquiring fresh land.
New land, etc.
Yes.
And I honestly tell you, if you put in all this land together, huge amounts can be done. That's
there is
one
enough
thing.
available. Yes.
The second point that I would want to make here is that in the land manufacturing, the way that it's come up, you've got to change, if you like, the process of acquiring land which is below 100 acres.
Right.
Completely, because this Land Acquisition Act applies to land which is above 100 hectares, I think, or something like that. But for even for below those, you got all of these things. I think you need to change that so that the smaller acquisition is it doesn't get affected.
So these kinds of things can be done. These modifications.
And finally, I think if you can just introduce one thing, that you announce the change of land use ahead of acquiring the land.
Right.
You can then get a market valuation which will be very close to the real one,
right,
so that you don't have to get into these land price fixing formulas that the law suggests.
Mr. Bhargav.
I think the change which has been done, where you have to actually buy land on negotiation instead of government acquiring land, which is a good one. Because government acquiring land led to all kinds of subsequent problems with the land, litigation, escalation of cost and things. So I'm personally in favor of people buying land on their own, negotiate with the landowner and buy the land like you buy any other commodity.
Right.
And what Rajiv said, I think is perfectly good, that all this land which is lying around in industrial, most of it is underutilized.
Yes.
Utilize it for better purposes by letting people, give it to private people now to run it and run these things. Large industries will still require land, and a lot of these small industries actually have to come up around large industries.
That's right.
Because if you're going to get the kind of industrial development you want, it has to be a lot more of large industries.
Right.
You will not get industrial development by thinking that only small-scale industries will grow. And so therefore, you have to make a system.
So this whole fallow land that is lying,
exactly,
move it in. Do not even get into the problem of trying to acquire fresh land. Neeraj.
Raghav, in India, it's politically convenient to be pro-farmer. Or that's the way the political economy is. But the fact is that 65% of the workforce producing 15% of the GDP, which is the reality of agriculture, is not sustainable. So you ultimately need to get people out of agriculture and into manufacturing. That's where the jobs will come. That's where you don't need necessarily an English language skill like you need in the services sector. So I think it makes eminent sense, political sense, to enable manufacturing, because that's the only sector which is going to absorb the unemployed or the underemployed from agriculture. And making easy land available is the only way. And this government land banks can be auctioned out. I mean, make it a transparent process. Otherwise, there'll be scandals that the government is giving it to A, B, C. Make it a transparent process, and the underutilized land should be used, and let acquisition also be easy.
One point though. There is this provision, which is a very pernicious one in the Act, which is called the social impact analysis.
That's right.
This has to be changed. There is no land that will be acquired if the social impact analysis,
which is very much what we are suggesting, that even if you can't politically now change the price formula, because it's sort of now embedded.
Just amend that.
Just amend all those provisions.
The social impact analysis, and then looking for all those people who are affected, including the laborers who
including
are
people, who are not owners of the land.
Who are not owners of the land. I think those are just, and then there's this one other provision, which is that under the Act, the buyer has to provide a set of 18 services to those in that area for those from whom the land has been acquired, includes things like schools and dispensaries and so on. This is going to just make it impossible to do that.
Is there any input coming in from the audience? Any question, any comment very quickly before we go into a break?
Talking about the small and medium enterprises, they don't need any support, they don't need any incentive. They want credit at the same rate, they want a even playing ground, and they want whatever their infrastructure, whatever their other facilities required on the spot and in the international level. So if you can get that, no incentive is required. In fact, government is providing incentive just to hoodwink them what is right and what should be given to them.
Okay, so that's point well made, sir. Thank you very much. We need to take a break at this stage. You go to our website, thinkindia.in.com, give your suggestions, and come right back. We'll be back after a break. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. We are looking at how the manufacturing sector could be given a boost by policy initiatives. We've already spoken about 6 policy initiatives, and we come here to our 7th and 8th one. The 7th one is also going to be contentious. People will say that you are removing the cross-subsidy. We are saying the cost of power and energy should be lowered for industry, because today industry is cross-subsidizing agriculture and consumers. We are saying create a level playing field. And point number 8 is that any preferential treatment that you give to public sector units, that should be removed so that everybody is competing on the same level playing field. And you see these protection in areas like defense, manufacturing, and several other capital goods industries. So I'm going to go to Mr. Bhargav first.
If you want a competitive industry to grow in India, and that's what, if you want to get to 25%, you have to have a competitive industry which can also export. You cannot use it to cross-subsidize other sectors when the rest of the world is not doing it.
Right.
And if you do that, you're priced out of the market. So you stop growth. So you have to decide, do you want industry to grow? Do you want jobs to be created? Or do you want to subsidize the domestic consumer?
It's the same mindset issue, isn't it, Rajiv?
It's a mindset right from the beginning.
It's a political issue, because you are in the midst of competitive populism instead of competitive good governance. And competitive populism says you subsidize consumption rather than investment. So which is why you have the industry cross-subsidizing, not just for energy, but for freight, but for land, but for and for capital costs, etc. All of, and it's exactly the opposite in China, where the industry is getting much, is getting capital at pretty much, everything there is lower than what the consumer gets. So that's the first point.
Don't our politicians then have to really educate the people that populism is actually, manufacturing is populism. It is popular.
You and I first have to educate the politicians. You see, that's the first thing. Honestly,
I agree. The real thing is education. Unless
And,
people understand.
Unless you get jobs, there is no
Jobs,
populism.
exactly.
But
jobs.
You see the problem. You see
It's
that
all about jobs.
The entitlement culture that we've got has to be replaced by an empowerment culture, and the fact that empowerment comes out of true and productive employment.
Right.
And everybody in this country wants that. They don't want to live on doles.
Right.
But that is what we don't understand. And the second one, that the point that you raised is absolutely the public sector units do not need to be mollycoddled anymore. They do not need any protection. There are no more infants, and they have to stand up. And the private sector should be given the level playing field vis-a-vis the public sector units.
Rajesh.
The cost of power is obviously, if you can reduce the cost of power and energy to industry, that's a
But
great
freight
thing.
as well.
Or inputs, several inputs, even finance we are saying.
Right. But the issue that is here, and in particular, there are some states, for example, if you think about Bihar, let's say, right, the issues there in manufacturing would be land and power.
Right.
It's not about the price of power, or it's not the cost, it's the availability.
It's the availability.
If it is just not possible to have that power, then you have to use your diesel sets, and your cost of power goes up
and the cost
significantly.
goes up. Yeah.
So it is an issue, but it is not not the effective constraint at this point.
Right.
I think.
Dheeraj?
Yeah, I think Raghav, again, on this point of cross subsidies, we tie in with the mindset point, the first point. I mean, I think we just need to this will be part of that prioritizing manufacturing, give manufacturing first priority.
Just call it agenda number one.
And I think the second point about PSUs, for example, Hindustan Aeronautics is a classic example, defense PSUs. There's absolutely no reason why they should be given preference when they have singularly failed to upgrade to world standards. And we import all of our defense equipment, spending billions of dollars of foreign exchange, which we can't afford. There's absolutely no reason to protect them. Let the Indian private sector in. Even if you don't want FDI, let the Indian private sector in.
Basic principle to accept is that allow competition in all areas.
That's right.
That's it.
One small institutional change that I suggested. In the Defense Ministry, there is something called a Equipment Acquisition Committee, in which there is a joint secretary public sector acquisition.
Right.
I had said, please appoint also a joint secretary private sector acquisition.
Yes.
That's all that you need to do.
Questions from the audience? Any observations? Any thoughts?
So the biggest problem is, our CSIR laboratories now, they are filing bogus patents. I am an inventor, I know that. So now, and they are wasting about $10 billion of public money. So we need to, you can say, release all our, labs for public good.
In fact,
thank you.
Yes. In fact, our point number 9 is quite similar to what you are saying. We are saying you've got to now strengthen innovation in our industry. You've got to give tax breaks so that genuine innovators, genuine patent holders can be encouraged. Now, it's a motherhood and vanilla point. You can't really disagree with it.
This is one shoe that is squarely on the foot of the industry itself. Our Indian industry, by and large, is in the process of taking shortcuts and always getting the sort of easiest way forward, which is to acquire technology and so on and get on with it. Our industry, the private sector, and I can say it from the inside as well, the great majority is not interested in developing an Indian brand which is indigenous and which is actually a long-term strategy.
So how do we get it going? Because this is very important. You can't live on borrowed technology always.
You can't live on borrowed technology. And I think the way forward is that you really raise the incentives. That's one part. But the second part, I think, is again a huge amount of education, and I can't say anything else from it, which is to say that
But once you throw them open to foreign competition, then to survive, they will have to do.
Quite often encourage the reverse. Which is that in order to become more competitive, you acquire immediately what is available.
But you see the car industry, Rajiv, where we have thrown ourselves open to 100% foreign competition. So you have a Mahindra, you have a Tata who are going out and acquiring foreign companies. You have a Scorpio, which is a domestic product. So you are seeing that Indian companies.
When you have thrown open the consumer durables, just the reverse has happened.
Right.
So the companies have gone fat, as it were. I think what you need to do is to create this is what Mr. Mashelkar did, and I talked to Mashelkar, and that's the way forward. The government should lead from the front, but involve the private sector in doing strategic projects, which will be more R&D and patent and
Rajesh, how do we solve this conundrum that Indian industry does not do enough R&D?
It's a tough challenge. The one thing that we can start focusing on is greater industry academia linkage. Yeah. Our academic institutions, research places talk very little to the real need of the industry, and when they talk, that also happens at a very select level. that conversation should become
Okay.
better.
So we are now down to point number 10, and we are also coming to the end of this exercise. Point number 10 is about creating industrial clusters, so that you can have auto clusters, pharmaceutical clusters, consumer electronic clusters that you talked about, and this is all related to all the points really: land acquisition, labor mobility, getting the mindset right, allowing industry. So obviously this needs to be done, Mr. Bhargav, but how?
The whole problem is how, because we've tried all these cluster approaches all these
SEZs.
50 years.
Yes.
They've not worked.
So how to make it work? Because this must work if manufacturing has to grow.
Personally, I think these clusters won't work. I think what you need to do is to create a general atmosphere where it's easy to do business, where infrastructure is available, where people can set up industries and work where they need to work.
So you're saying you don't have to force a cluster.
You don't have to force people to come at one place.
But if you create an enabling environment.
And to add to what Rajiv said, I'll only add that if you want to accelerate manufacturing now, because we don't have the leisure of a long time, you will not do it by trying to build only Indian brands.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. You don't have the time to do it.
Yeah. So on the cluster approach, we are seeing some benefits. Say that Gurgaon is becoming an auto cluster. We've got Pune, which is becoming an auto cluster.
Yourself. It is becoming one.
Right.
You don't make it one.
Exactly.
So see, the point therefore is that you make the enabling conditions attractive. You improve the India's ranking in the doing business environment.
Right.
You remove the infrastructure deficit. And there is what is called the economics of conglomeration, which will take care of people conglomerating where they need to conglomerate.
Where they get special.
So this whole culture or mindset of creating enclaves as a second best solution, I think has to be now pushed out.
Therefore, Rajesh, in a sense, this whole talk about the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, where really, while you're talking about clusters, you're also first talking about creating the infrastructure. Is that the way to go?
The idea, and that is exactly what is flagged here, is this concept of macro engineering should go. Right? You cannot try to do things in a planned manner, and you cannot think of whole India as a project, and you decide where private players would come and set up what industries in what location.
No, but I think when we say cluster, we are talking about creating the enabling environment for industry to come up.
Yes.
Very much like the Gurgaon example or the example of the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor.
Tamil Nadu has emerged as an auto cluster.
Yes.
Because they allowed the enabling conditions to become
exactly.
better.
So I think that's the point, right?
Yeah, I think part of the land issue, in particularly, if government have land in a particular tract, I think Gujarat has done this fairly successfully, that in a particular tract, they've got the auto industry going from where there was no auto industry. The auto industry has been traditionally in Tamil Nadu or Haryana, and so other states. So I mean, it can be done, but it's just a matter of initiative, leadership, showing the way. And the point on infrastructure, I think this is basically a point on infrastructure, but infrastructure we're doing on a separate show, so we're not discussing it in detail here. But yeah, you create particular areas where you have the full infrastructure for manufacturing
the regulatory environment. Yeah. You reduce the regulatory burden.
Right.
You remove the infrastructure deficit, and you enable the better quality of skills.
Right.
And you will see that all the clusters will come up.
That industry will gravitate towards that.
Gurgaon has come up because two industries came up there.
That's right.
Maruti and Hero Honda.
That's right.
And it developed. Government didn't have anything to do with it.
Right. So there you are. You've heard our panel of experts and our audience pitching in for the next Prime Minister. There are these 10 points that we have. Clearly, the overriding point for the next Prime Minister is to force this thinking in the country that manufacturing is not something which is elitist. Manufacturing, frankly, is something that this country needs as much as it needs education, as much as it needs health. It should become priority number one for the new Prime Minister. Before we go, take a look at all our 10 points.